Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast, and thank you for joining me for folks' favorite Fandom Friday. Now, since just a couple of weeks into this series, you've noticed that I've been doing something a little different on these Fridays. I've been spending them chatting with other folks in the Tolkien community who are at San Diego Comic-Con in July, along with the Amazon events that were hosted there. That way we can share our experiences with you and get you excited for Rings of Power Season 2, which actually by the time this airs will be almost over. And that's because I want to catch everybody when their memories are fresh. So all my chats with these folks are happening in the first week of August or so, 3 weeks before the series even begins. So just keep that in mind in case our guest today has any predictions that end up way off base. Speaking of today's guest, she's been working mostly behind the scenes to support one of the Tolkien fandom's biggest organizations, the OneRing.net. She's been a staffer there for 17 years, I think, and is now their chief operations officer. And while she and I didn't meet until recently, actually a couple of years back, it turns out she was at and had a hand in putting together many of the Oscar parties for the Jackson films that I recall so fondly. In fact, was that you singing Into the West with Billy Boyd and B-Cake some 20 years ago? I thought
it sure was. I mean, that makes me feel old. It can't have been that long ago. No, that was one of the
We were
Hobbit
children, right? We were just teenagers. Yeah.
But that was one of the Hobbit parties, so maybe not quite as long ago as all that.
Oh, okay, that's right. It wasn't the Two Towers or the Return of the King. Okay. Well, folks, she's also a stage director, teacher, and singer. She does a million things. She even runs her own opera company. Please welcome Kirsten Cairns, better known as Green Dragon.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It is truly my pleasure. Now, since you are new to both the TTT and the Prancing Pony podcast, I want to start with a question that I ask everybody the first time they're on. Tell us about your first experience with Tolkien's works, and then what it is about them that keeps you coming back.
So first experience, my dad is a Tolkien fan, so I have him to thank, as so many of us do. Our parents introduce us to it. When I was too small really to be appreciating the books, he was reading The Hobbit to my brothers who are older than me, but I was adamant that I was going to listen in, and I was hooked and drawn into it. And then my brother had an LP of the Rankin Bass Hobbit, the cartoon. Now, I hadn't seen the film. I didn't see the film for years and years, but my brother had one of those like read-along LPs.
Yeah.
And I was addicted to that. I listened to it over and over again. I looked at the pictures. I drew my own version. Somewhere I have a sort of long frieze that I drew of the Battle of the Five Armies, complete with bats and orcs bleeding black blood and eagles like seagulls. So,
That's fair. Better looking than my eagles, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I still have that somewhere. So it was my dad reading it to my brothers. Then it was the Rankin Bass cartoon. The Bakshi cartoon terrified me when I was a kid. The ring rates in that I thought were terrifying. And then I first read Lord of the Rings. I was about 11. And funny story about that. I was at primary school, and we used to have one of those like private reading hour that you bring your own book, and on a Friday morning there was an hour where you just had to read a book, and of course I loved that. But at the time we were all very into these books called Sweet Dream books, which in America would be like Sweet Valley High. They were kind of tween romance fiction. And my teacher, who was this guy called John England, whom I really admired, came around the room to see what all the girls were reading. He was picking up our books to see what we were reading. And that week I happened to be reading one of these tween romances. And he sort of picked it up and he looked at me like, I'm so disappointed in you. And I was like, damn it, last week I was reading Tolkien. Why didn't you walk around the room last week? So that's an abiding memory of when I first read the Lord of the Rings trilogy.
That is great. And what is it that keeps you coming back to Middle-earth? Because like me, you've been in it for a very long time.
Yeah. It was Peter Jackson's films that really first brought me back to it with an obsession.
Yeah.
It had always been a passion and a love, but in fact, Star Wars was my main fandom as we were approaching the year 2000. And then the release of the Jackson movies really is what sucked me into the Tolkien fandom in a big way. And to be honest, one of the things that really keeps me coming back is the fandom. It's the community. Through volunteering with the OneRing.net, I have made so many lifelong friends. And I just love spending time with the people in this excellent and admirable community. So I think that's really what keeps me coming back.
That's a great answer. I really like that. Speaking of the OneRing.net, you've been with them for a very long time. Tell us what led you from discussion board lurker all the way to chief operations officer. And then second, congrats on Torn's 25th anniversary. And my follow-up question to that's going to be, how do you best see it serving the Tolkien fandom over the next quarter century?
Yeah, well, again, obviously I was only 4 when I started to be
right.
involved.
Of course you were.
Clearly.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah.
Yeah, when I found the message boards shortly after Fellowship of the Ring came out in theaters, and I was totally new to anything of that ilk, so I didn't even announce myself. I found out later that there was a sort of tradition that when you were a newbie, you announced yourself, and there was a whole thing that went with that. I didn't. I just started posting, joining chats and threads on the message boards. I love planning events. Part of what I do, I'm a stage director, and that's putting on events, basically putting on a show. And so I was living in Boston at the time, and I quite quickly got involved with sort of smaller events that were going on. At the time, there were a lot of different smaller groups for the OneRing.
So like the line parties and things, right?
Exactly, correct. So I got involved there. And then during what was known as the lean years, between the Lord of the Rings trilogy and then the Hobbit trilogy, when we were sort of trying to make the Hobbit happen, we decided one year at Dragon Con to have a big gathering. We called it Woot Moot. And we tried to get as many people in the fandom as possible to come to Dragon Con, even if they weren't regular Dragon Con goers. And so 2 of the 4 founders of the OneRing.net came to Dragon Con that year for Woot Moot.
Okay.
I helped to organize it, met them there. They said, "Oh, would you like to volunteer as a staffer at the OneRing?" And so that was how it began.
Yeah.
We're all volunteers,
right.
I hasten to add. So it sounds very grand that I'm chief operations officer. It just means I spend more of my spare time on this. Than most people do.
That's kind of what I figured. Yeah. It doesn't exactly come with a corner office, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But because I'm a freelancer, because I love event planning, because I sort of work in a similar field, and because my schedule is weird, it means I have time to put into the OneRing.net. And so that's why I've ended up finding myself sort of taking the reins more and more and more, particularly as the original 4 founders have had to step back. I also don't have kids, and that makes a big difference. A lot of our contemporaries are busy taking their kids to school. And again, it's just the question of having the free time and the desire to put in the energy to make things run as well as we possibly can. Your second bit about where do we see it going, or where do I see it going in the future? I think one of the things that's really important about the OneRing.net, and that I hold very dear, is that it has always been about community. So the tagline is forged by and for fans. We always talk about our fellow fans. We never think of us as having fans. The OneRing.net doesn't have fans. Tolkien has fans, and we are sharing that fandom. There's no kind of face of the OneRing.net. Sure, there are people who are known more because they're seen doing podcasts and things, but it's never been about an individual. It's always been about the community, and that is the strength of the OneRing.net, because it means if there comes a day in the future where I say, you know what, I haven't got the time and energy for this anymore, there'll be someone else ready to step in. So we continue to thrive because we're a community. And as I said before, I absolutely love this community. Every year I meet new people at conventions, at events. New people say, "Hey, can I get involved with the OneRing.net?" And so I think in another 25 years, people will still be loving Tolkien, and hopefully the OneRing.net will still be a part of that fandom.
I'm sure it will be. You mentioned some of the events and the conventions. Well, one of those was, of course, San Diego Comic-Con. It was great to see you there. I want to find out from you, what were your highlights from either the Thursday night event or Hall H on Friday? And then from those highlights, was there anything you learned that has made you even more excited for the launch of season 2 of The Rings of Power?
Yeah, it was wonderful seeing the space, Venue 808, the way it had been set up, the costumes that were on display. I was amazed that they had all of the Rings of Power, not the One Ring, all of the other Rings of Power on display for us to look at. That was incredible. That like kind of felt like a massive spoiler that we were allowed to see these rings. And I loved seeing in Hall H during one of the clips, John Howe sketching the rings. You always know if John Howe is involved in the design, it's going to be beautiful.
That's
know. So I really enjoyed that. I had a wonderful conversation with Sam Hazeldine on Thursday night, who is taking on the role of Adar with Joseph having stepped away. And that was a highlight for me because what a nice guy, a terrific actor. But Joseph Moore was wonderful in season 1. And I think a lot of us were very disappointed that he was stepping away from the show. And so I asked Sam how it felt to be stepping into a role. And we had a really good chat about how he loved what Joseph Moore had done with the character. And he said that really helps because there wasn't anything where I was like, oh, I wouldn't have wanted to take it in that direction. It was all, yes, I get it. I understand his approach. I understand where this character's coming from. But I realized, in a way, it's a bit like if you're playing Hamlet, it doesn't matter that someone else has played Hamlet. You're sort of making the character your own. And Sam is a very experienced theatre actor. And I was really reassured in talking to him. I think he's going to be fantastic as Adar. And I think, although Joseph Moore was so amazing, I don't think we'll miss him. I think Sam is going to really be spectacular in the role. So that was chatting with him was a real highlight.
That's good to know.
Me.
And that made you more excited than specifically for his storyline, I would imagine.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that is a fascinating character to me. I don't really quite know where that's going to go. I sort of wondered why, in a way, why the showrunners felt the need to create that character. Is it simply to show us more of another side to the orcs so that they're not just in the sort of grunting villain role?
Not the cannon fodder.
Right. Creating a richness there for this character that we see has this real love for his children. I don't know, but I'm excited to see what they do with it and with such great acting.
That's a very good point. I feel like that is a character I didn't initially quite understand why they were filling in that blank. It made sense to fill in the blanks for Arondir and for a young Isildur, for instance. But filling in a blank that didn't even exist, right? I mean, creating a blank and then filling it in was interesting. But I think you're right. There's some elements there. Certainly, one of the highlights for last season for me was that conversation he had with Galadriel about the origin of the orcs. And of course, my hardcore fans will know that Tolkien bounced back and forth over and over with what the origin of orcs really was. And I'm not sure we can land on any one definition, but it is going to be interesting to see where they go with that storyline. And I'm glad to hear you say what you did about Sam.
Yeah, I guess one of the things for the showrunners was because they wanted to keep Sauron's identity a mystery. They kind of had to have the orcs be following someone who wasn't Sauron. I guess that was part of it. But I find every time I'm writing anything about when we get a new trailer or when we get new clips or new footage, the thing that really excites me about the show, and maybe this is because of my work as a stage director, is the acting. This ensemble cast is incredible, and I cannot wait to see more of that.
Yeah, there's going to be some incredible acting from this cast. I mean, I know that I've had my share of criticisms of the show, and the showrunners are aware of that, and they chatted with me about that at the Thursday night event. Never criticized me for being anything but hard but fair. But one of the things that I've never criticized is the casting. That's been spot on from the get go, and I'm really looking forward to seeing season 2 and where that goes. Kirsten, if folks want to follow you on social media, I know you don't have the same kind of presence that some of the content creators do, but maybe people do want to keep an eye on you, at least on Twitter, and find out all the witty things you say. Where can they find you?
Well, on Twitter, I'm Kirsten Z, as we say in the UK, but Z Cairns. I don't tweet very much. I do try to tweet for the One Ring. So often when you see tweets for the One Ring, that'll be me writing it.
Okay.
But look for me on Instagram as Enigma Chamber Opera. That is my little opera company.
Okay.
So if anyone is interested in what I'm doing beyond the Tolkien realm, Enigma Chamber Opera is what to look for, or Kirsten Z Cairns.
Excellent.
But otherwise, anytime you see anything posted by Green Dragon on the homepage, it's I.
Excellent. All right. Well, Kirsten, thank you again for joining me today. It really was a pleasure to see you at San Diego Comic-Con last month. I hope to see you again before Rings of Power Season 3 comes out.
Well, yeah, let's hope. Let's hope. It's always good to see you. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, folks, that is it for today's Fandom Friday. But come back the next time we have some Fandom Fridays to meet another of your fellow Tolkien fans and maybe even learn what niches of the community you might be interested in exploring. And if you're interested in joining me here for a future Fandom Friday, let me know by emailing barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a bonus episode every week, and more. And then please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we wrap up this week and this series with Second Age Saturday. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications, and please follow or subscribe on your podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.